Better?
There we go. Okay. I think we're recording. We're
Oh,
recording.
yeah.
Yes. Hey guys, welcome. This is the Aloha Keto March to Measure special with an incredible guest. We have the rock star doctor of keto, Dr. Annette Bosworth, MD here. And we can jump right in. We have a really awesome story to share from a family member. And then Dr. Boz is going to share some awesome things. And then we have a couple of Aloha Keto people here that are going to be blessed with a pretty cool show because we're going to share some things, hopefully a little bit different than what people are used to, because sometimes it's not about like what you know, sometimes it's something else. And me and Christina talk about is like, until you know why you're doing something, it doesn't matter. All this how and all this information does not really matter unless you know why you're doing it. So before we bring on Dr. Boz, I wanted to have my awesome brother man, Keone Rosario, okay, Waianae, Hawaii. Can you please share like a freaking awesome story?
Hey, thanks, Marlon, for having us on this call. Super appreciation for you and Dr. Boz and all that the work that you guys are doing. I actually was introduced to this whole keto life by my beautiful wife here, Angie. She turned me on to this, lifestyle. And like I told you earlier, I feel very inadequate because I'm not like total all-in hardcore keto dude. I just took some of the principles that you guys teach and that you guys promote, and it's really made a huge difference in my life. 3 years ago in 2018, I was rushed to the hospital. I had to go emergency to do dialysis. Prior to that, I've been diabetic, I think since maybe 25, 26. Never really felt sick. And I don't know how, that is for other diabetics, but I never really felt sick. So the whole time of that, I just lived a regular life, worked in construction. So, you're always eating, not the most healthiest foods, partying with the boys and all that kind of stuff. So I didn't even, like I said, I didn't feel sick. So I never treated it. I never acted like I was sick. So I would just continue to live my life the same. Even though the numbers, like how you said earlier, Marlon, numbers don't lie. Even though the numbers are saying that, I'm going to be in trouble, maybe 10, 20 years down the road. But during that time, I just never addressed, my diabetes because I just never felt sick. Was on insulin, maybe 50 units for 10, 15 years. Just recently, maybe 4 years ago, I took myself off of insulin because of the knowledge that I started gaining from, stuff that Dr. Boz shares, and also a good, a good talk that I heard from Dr. Fong. And he actually said that giving insulin to a type 2 diabetic is like giving alcohol to an alcoholic and hoping they're going to get better. When I heard that, I was like, oh my God, that is just crazy. And so, yeah, I took myself off. And in 2015, my A1C, because I just saw my doctor 2 weeks ago. In 2015, my A1C was 16 point something. So that's just bonkers if you guys know about A1C. And then maybe 3 years ago, when I first started dialysis, I think it was in the 13s. And then, because I just saw my doctor 2 weeks ago, and he said that I'm one of the best, got my A1C in check. He's never seen somebody do it like this for in his whole practice, is what he actually told me. So I told him what I was doing and all that. I gave him you guys info. So hopefully he looking at you guys' videos. He's a really good guy though. So anyways, so my first year on dialysis, I really started to learn about keto. Second year, still learning, but the third year, which we just got done now with the 2020, is when I was able to sustain, like now my A1C is at 5.7.
Wow.
Which with no medicine, I'm not taking any diabetic medicine or anything. All I take is amlodipine for high blood pressure, and Synacat. I forget what that's for, but I'm just taking 2 medicines and none is for diabetes. So I was able to bring that number down. And I wish I really knew, like me and Marlon was just talking, I wish I knew about this way of life 10, 15 years ago, maybe I wouldn't even be on dialysis right now.
Right.
But it's just the learning curve, and the majority usually is never right. If you look throughout history, the majority is usually never right. So you got to go against the grain with what most people are doing, and just super appreciative for
What's up?
the knowledge that you guys been sharing. And I just, like I said, I'm not even hardcore, but if I do get I need to get hardcore, and my life will only get better. And Marlon, you hit it on the note. You got to know your why you do anything. And my why right now is I have many, but one in particular. I have a beautiful young granddaughter who's 7 years old, and I'm practically raising her because her dad's not in the picture. But my dream is to walk her down the aisle when the time comes. So I need to be healthy and fit to do that, and that's my why on pursuing this keto lifestyle. So that's about it, man. I hope that helps. So love you, bye.
Oh no, you guys! I know you guys are sticking around, so thank you, Keone. And I know Angie has her own story to tell. But yeah, and I want Dr. Buzz knows that if you let me go, I'll just keep talking and talking. Everybody's gonna check out. So let me just try to spend only a few minutes. Is that possible? A few minutes talking about like.
No. Here, I'll have a leash ready.
Let me tell you, like, so me and Keone are in Hawaii, and Dr. Baz, one of the comments you made when you came here and visited, which I think is a divine appointment. Like, all of a sudden, I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube commenting about videos on your channel, and just so happened you were coming to here with Prescott to enroll him in UH, and just everything came together where like I got the blessing to be able to take you guys out and almost had you drown out there 100 yards out to sea at Yokohama, which is hopefully
It's awesome. It's so awesome.
I'm glad that turned out okay, because it's like, hey, well, part of me was like, wow, this lady she wants to do this, man. So we swam like over 100 yards out in open water. I don't know if your South Dakota people know that that's the ocean, man. And my mind, like, whales and sharks, actually whales migrate past that beach, would have been crazy to like have you live through Jonah the whale. Jonah the whale swallows up Dr. Boz. anyway, that was the topic. But what's great is when you came down here and we did the meeting, but you said something to me that stuck in my brain. You said that you've never seen so many dialysis clinics per capita. And Aloha Keto came about because two reasons, I'll tell you. Well, I had issues that we won't talk about, but we're the fifth, we're in the top 5 for diabetes in all of America, all of the US, right? And we're there's only 1.4 million people in the entire state of Hawaii. So diabetes is ravaging this state. And because you can go to McDonald's and get rice, guys. Every meal in Hawaii, and Angie and Keone knows this, we grew up, you eat rice with everything, and then you get fried noodles when you are snacking in between meals, right? So we are carboholics. And Dr. Baz's special coming out about carb addiction is going to be powerful, but I don't want to get into that one. I want to tell you guys why, like what kind of lights me on fire is the fact that not only that, and trying to get myself better, but we have an aunt. I have an aunt, Sola, who my mom's sister, blood aunt. She is amazing. I had to watch with her family. She was in hospice at home due to diabetic complications, dialysis, and she passed away in 2020, in March of 2020. The last day or two of her life was her at home on, I don't even know what drugs they put. She could not talk. She was coughing blood, and it was so hard to see somebody that you're used to seeing have so much life not even be able to say goodbye to her family or have, it was rough. It seared into my eyeballs what I saw. And I'm like, what Keone said, imagine if we had known this 10, 20 years ago. I really feel in my heart it wouldn't have happened to her. And people in Hawaii, Keone, the hothead, they don't know.
Yeah.
They eat this way. And shout, I'm gonna put your brother Keola on blast right now, right? He's not on dialysis with a double-digit A1C. You're on dialysis and you've got a healthy A1C. That's the power of what we can do. So seeing my auntie go through that, And that it's like, I can't, the image is in my eyeballs. So that's what I want to do with this. And I'm so privileged to have people like Dr. Boz helping us, because we're all lay people. And here we have a medical doctor going to drop some wisdom bombs on us. And thank God I didn't kill her at the beach, because she's going to now a lot of people what she's going to say. Okay, so with that, I want her to talk about an awesome program that she's making, the things she's currently doing. And the thing that I think is going to really bless a lot of people with this live is it's not so much about the physiology, because Dr. Boz has all that knowledge about what's happening in your body, nutrition-wise, medical-wise, but the fact that she's had so many people become successful because of what she knows about psychology, I'm gonna say it, in my opinion, the psychology of this trumps the physiology, because
Amen.
you got the psychology, it ain't gonna work. So Dr. Boz, if you can, I would love if you could share. We're at 10:20, talk as long as you want about what you've, as a practicing physician, you've seen people. I mean, it must be frustrating for you to have all the knowledge and the power and still have people be at all places in the spectrum. So
Right.
you can put in context for us, like how important the psychology is for affecting the physiology.
Right. Well, thank you for the introduction. And I will tell you that you have a blessing in Marlon because of his courage to just stand still and say, someone needs to begin the leadership locally. And as I look out across the different programs, but mainly the communities of people that have joined in a journey of becoming healthier, the first thing that I do when I identify a leader is praise on them to make sure they know that they're being a leader. That culture of having the way you think grow around you is in part recognizing this is something you learn by watching another person do it. So when you have somebody like Marlon who says, I'm going to need people around me in order to be successful, he's right. That's the key. This group is as much to benefit him as it does the rest of the people. And when leaders don't recognize how much their ripple effect has, they fade, they fatigue, they wear out, they burn out. And it's through being in this leadership role for almost 3 decades now, I will tell you that the sustainability of me is in part thanks to several of my leaders who took time to say, here's what you're doing right. Here's the impact you're having, and here's how you sustain the leadership. So as I look at, the first book that I wrote was the story of my mother who was suffering from cancer. After 10 years, she was ready to give up. And I get this question a lot in my practice because I can't help but love people. It's a default. It's this default place from my upbringing that says, I have to be careful how many people I let in my circle of love because I'm all in once I'm in. And they frequently ask me when I'm at a choice point in their care, what would you do? And of course, there's times in my life where the season isn't great and you reflexively just tell them what the textbook says to do. But when I'm in my moment, when I'm in my flow, when I'm doing the best job of being the physician advocating for the patient, which I recognize isn't every day, but I do my best to say, don't push so hard that you leave that zone. When I get asked that question, I really take it seriously. And as my mom is about to say, I give up, I'm not doing this chemo thing again. I'm 71 years old. I'm not living my life this way. Her brain was not healthy. And that's my thing, is how do you heal a brain? How do you really get the best brain repair? And when we walked out of this moment where she was supposed to get her next round of chemo, she has the slip in her hand to go get the chemo. And one hallway is to go schedule the chemo, and the other hallway leads us to the front door. And we're standing in this junction in the hospital. And I said, Mom, do you trust me? And she kind of flippantly says, of course I trust you. And I'm like, no, with tears in my eyes, I'm like, with your whole life, do you trust me? And she gets a little emotional too. And she goes, yes. And that's when I said, give me 6 weeks. Let me show you what I would do. And we got in the car, we left my car there, we drove to the farm, which was 100 miles away. And we went full in as I spent those 100 miles teaching her about how important it was that her cancer cells were using sugar. And if we take all the sugar out of her body, she dies. But if we could lower the sugar enough, her body would use this other fuel called a ketone, which has a setting, a chemistry set that has lower inflammation, that has faster brain repair, that has a stronger immune system. And oh, by the way, your cancer cells can't use that ketone. They can only use glucose. So you've just really depleted the fuel of those cancer cells. So that first book, Any Way You Can, tells the story of what it is I taught my mom in those weeks where we were just beginning. And then it goes on to show you the next 2 years of where it was not a perfect journey. And I was more than skeptical when I first was reading about the ketogenic diet, that it was some sort of, addition to an acai berry, rub it on your skin and you'll be all better. I've seen, infomercials that was actually a thing. And you're like, that is so stupid. So I had plenty of skepticism, but I went to my librarian and said, all right, I need the real data on what is up with this powerful process of putting a patient in a state of ketosis. And the rabbit holes were insane. There was plenty of literature that I had no idea about. I'd never been taught this. I'd never learned this. But as I did that, I boiled it down into the lessons that my mom needed to know. And she had a foggy brain at the beginning. So these were very simplified. But what I've learned isn't that what I do with my patients anyway? I start where they're at. And most people, they don't care that your mitochondria are going to be stronger, healthier, and reproduce in a much better way with more inner folds if you're in a state of ketosis. They just don't care. They care, do they feel better? And how the heck do you do it? So as her story unfolds and I realize I can't go back to the way I've been doing medicine for the last 25 years, 22 years, whatever it was. But instead, I needed to have a clinic where this is what I teach. And as God had blessed my career with, I was repairing brains, chronic illness, but of high blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, folks on dialysis like Kiani had, 70% of my population were those chronic illnesses. And where my heart came alive, where my passion came alive, was to show them what it was doing to their brain. And I think it was also a very motivating part for a patient to say, yep, you don't feel anything now, but let me show you what happens when the brain doesn't work right. You aren't going to feel it today. You're going to feel a little bit of tired, a little bit of lack of focus, a little bit of depression, a little bit of worry, but it builds up for where you're going in the next 20 years. And it was that kind of motivation that would get a patient's attention to say they don't want that. They've seen dementia. Almost everybody had. And it's a trap. You can't undo it once you're there. You've got to prevent it. It's only a preventable problem. And as I evolved over the next year and a half, I realized I needed to write down the protocol that I was doing in my clinic. Like, what is it? Yes, the first book is this beginner's. It's a very compassionate story. It's got some humor. It's got you actually don't really, most people don't realize they're learning about ketosis because they're so ingrained in what the story teaches them. But I think that's how human brains learn anyway. So over the course of the next year and a half, I'm trying to write down a protocol, and it's a super boring book until I realize, oh, I need to put a patient story in this book as well. And I have dozens, but when you ask people, can I write about your story? They all run for the woods. They're going to hide. No, don't tell anybody what I'm doing. So thankfully, I had a patient brave enough to say, yes, you can tell my story. Obviously, we've flipped his identity and helped to keep his name anonymous, but his story is powerful. And that's where the book that came out consistently, or the online course Consistently Keto, came from this book. It's called the Keto Continuum because I do think that's a much better representation of the psychology that happens when people change behavior. And, in part, it's not just a link to, let's switch your chemistry in your body. It has a very similar path to when a patient comes to me and they've had their second DUI and they need to not drink again. They need to not drink again. And they have this line in the sand that says, how do I not crave this thing I've been relying on to shut my brain off for the better part of 30 years? And as my clinic of brain repair had support groups in it, and we didn't divide support groups into why their brain was broken, but most of them had a link to sex, drugs, rock and roll, some other external force for why their body needed to escape life. And instead of using relationships or a hobby or a acts of service or a story, they used a substance or an addictive pattern of behavior like gambling or sex addiction. So as I watched, how do you walk people out of this? The substitute for those chemicals, when they succeeded, when they were 5 years out, writing me a Christmas letter saying, you changed my life. I didn't want to follow your instructions, but I did what you said. And here I am 5 years later with a different lease on life. Every single one of those patients that got to the 5-year mark were the ones who were able to supplant relationships instead of substances. And you say, let me put down that you have a prescription to go get some relationships. That does not work. Instead, you need to find a playground for people to grow relationships. And those are called support groups. Now, you can call them AA, you can call them 12 steps, you can call them in NA, but the real undertone of why they have worked for so many addictive processes is because what's growing in those groups are relationships. And the other thing that ties them to want to come to that relationship is a part of their brain called a mirror neuron, where instead of watching, I like to tell the story that when people get married, you blend one family and their bad behaviors and their good behaviors with another family of their bad behaviors and their good behaviors. So I think my husband and I were married maybe a year, somewhere in that year, and we're fighting. And in the middle of the fight, he says something that just stopped me. He said, "You're right, I'm wrong." And I can remember the moment he said it, that I'm like, I've never heard those words. And as I look back to that moment, I remember thinking, oh, my family, we fight for years before anybody will admit that they're wrong. And that was the changing moment where I said, oh, my mirror neuron just picked up something as an adult to say, it took me a couple of years to be able to say the words, honey, you're right, I'm wrong. And even to this day, when I go to say them, I instantly remember the place that I learned it. And I tell that story because as you grow, as you mature in your relationships in life and your wisdom that's supposed to happen as you travel and orbit the sun year after year, you're supposed to gain knowledge. But your core foundation for understanding comes from those childhood development, those adolescent years of who you copied. Did you have a youth pastor or a coach that showed you some things that your dad didn't show you, that your mom didn't show you? And if you did, just praise the Lord, because that matters in the development of those teenagers. But when you get outside of that developmental time, how the brain learns is it has to watch somebody do something they've never seen done before. Like, you're right, I'm wrong. And so you look at what happens in the playground of growing relationships. And that is this culture of, all right, when people start onto, doc, I can never drink again. They'll put me in jail. I'll lose my job. I'll lose my marriage. I got to not drink again. I got to do this. And you say, okay, so your why is what we would always start with in these patients. And we'd write down their why and I'd put it in their chart and I'd have it in this little sticky note in my electronic medical record where I'd be able to say, this is what motivates them. And then I'd watch what their why changes to, because it always starts with the superficial. I don't want another DUI. I don't want the embarrassment of people knowing that I use alcohol as much as I do. I don't want find that. And it's that superficial, like pride and honor get in the way of all change in life. And then comes something deeper. If they're going to succeed, something deeper evolves. And if they are able to step into the vulnerable places where they're learning from the other people in the group. And in my clinic, at that time, we were a full-fledged addiction clinic. It was an internal medicine clinic. There was no word addiction anywhere on the outside because that was very offensive to people. It was only after they realized that if you want to change behavior, I have a bunch of prescriptions that can fill this void, and it can bridge you for quite some time, but it will not repair your brain to the healthiest version it's supposed to be. The prescription needs to say, grow some relationships and find the people who are exempling behaviors that are sustainable and that are the journeys in life. I still think that addiction medicine is one of the few places left in medicine that allows us to use the science of addiction, to use the psychology of the addiction, which is another pillar of success, and to use the spiritual component of grow that human being, grow them into their strongest spirit. And I continue to say that. So as I looked at my protocol, and I had it all written down in a very scientific way, and this is what a doctor should do. And if you're a keto coach, maybe you would want to use this. I realized this is going to go about 10 people in the whole world would want to read this. And then I did what I did with my mom's story, which is I'm going to tell this story of a man who says, I want what this other guy has. I want what this other person has. And the other person he was talking about was my mom, that this woman had come from this very 75 pounds overweight, puffy, slow brain, lost her spirit to a fully restored. And she did it from the age of 71 to 75. And it was, the transition happened in about 8 months. But she lived the last 4 years of her life before COVID took her life with the strongest of her spirits, like back to what it was when I was a 10-year-old girl and saw this 30-year-old woman who just took that little town by storm and said, this is how you make happily ever after. This is what it looks like. And that journey of saying, okay, not only is the story Keto Continuum about a man who had a broken brain, who didn't know he had diabetes, he didn't know he had high blood pressure, he didn't know his brain was melting every day. He didn't fix this. He just knew he didn't feel good, and he had a very creative brain that he couldn't find. He just couldn't find it. It was like gone.
Hey, Dr. Boss.
Yes.
Can we drill down on that addiction part, because Hawaii also has a problem with methamphetamine, right? And your talk about carb addiction and how these food addictions, can we talk about how that's what everybody in the group talks about? I'm doing so good, then I relapse, or I binged, or I tried to have one cheat meal and it turned into a cheat month kind of thing. Yes. So physiologically, why is Keone knows this. I'll tell Keola to his face that he's Batu is the word for meth, in Hawaii, right? So he's Batu for carbs, because that's what I think it is. People cannot say no to it, right? So physiologically, the addiction, what's happening that makes these foods grab our brain so much? And also, I'm going to join the Beanie Club with you guys.
Oh. It's really cold here, and I'm in the basement. I
know we're trying to do this
on my heater.
This is how we're in solidarity with South Dakota, Hawaii, and we're wearing beanies. So
but you can pretend you're South Dakotan for a day.
But physiologically,
so I'll tell you, one of the things that I've had a difficult time finding the space to teach is because it turns into this flood of questions, which is, is it okay for kids to do keto? And I'm like, well, yes, it's okay for kids to do keto, but more importantly, it's the carb addiction that you're teaching them at the age of 12 that makes it so difficult to change as an adult. If I take one of the first questions when I'm doing an addiction intake is, how old were you when you started alcohol? How old were you when you started nicotine? How old were you when you started meth? How old were you when you started marijuana? When you look at the onset of that addictive patterned behavior, I instantly know that if you had it during peripubertal, meaning you started it right before puberty, and you were addicted through the puberty, and then the final maturation of that puberty brain, all the way to the age of 25, 26 years old, that If it started during peripubertal, they are the toughest patients to treat. You practically have to physically restrain them away from their drug for the first 2 months, because their brain is so defaulted that this is the chemical that I learned at a very important age was going to be the relief of my suffering. And if you think carbohydrates aren't a source of dopamine, first of all, I can show you brain scan after brain scan about how it surges that dopamine and it causes the relief and we feel better. But you can feel that. I mean, anybody who has struggled with their weight and
Hey,
they
Dr.
take away and they, yes.
When I was a social worker, all the kids that were drug exposed or had early childhood drug exposure, and I got them when they were later adolescents, the drug issue with them later in their life and even beyond when they would age out, it's so hard.
So hard. I mean, it's actually one of the first thing that I learned about you where I said, oh, I'm going to have a tough time ever letting go of Marlon for a friend because he was a social worker with teenagers. And you say, you don't understand how valuable it is that they have male role models that didn't do sex, drugs, rock and roll, that have, the cool factor, because when you show up in the white coat, I don't care how cool you want to be, you're not cool. The cool factor has to come from someone that's in their world, in their life. And my 20 minutes of intervention saying, I can write your prescriptions, but if nobody's teaching them and mirroring the behavior that they have to learn somewhere, we're all tapped out. And so you look around Hawaii and you say, what do you mean there's rice at McDonald's? Why? With what? But we have French fries and we have bread. So it's not like my community is any better. It's just different. And when you say, well, watch what happens when a 12-year-old does a good job. And look what people want to give him or her. They want to give them food. They want to give them high sugar food. They don't want to say, all right, if you do a great job, I have prepared a treasure hunt for you. And you're going to start at one story and you're going to go find this other story. And it's going to be a 6-part story where you unfold the best. And they don't even care what the hell's at the end of the treasure hunt. They cared about the excitement and the hide and seek of adults, like that's a thing, When you look at the reward is always based on food. And now I get this adult and their adult brain says, I know I've been smoking cigarettes since I was 12, but I have lung cancer at the age of 63. Can you teach me how to not want nicotine? And I'm like, not before the funeral. The brain repair is so slow at your age that even when I put them in ketosis, now, if I put them in ketosis, I can do a heck of a lot quicker job of reprogramming their brain, which is really how I ended up understanding ketosis. I didn't search for it for cancer. I had no idea it was going to help cancer. I just knew that if you were a Navy SEAL or if you were one of the NASA astronauts, you were such a commodity that if the brain got injured, they put the best scientists around them to say, how do we repair it? And I couldn't believe they were using ketones to repair a brain. And what I could do, and I'm really good at my job, what I could do in a matter of 18 months or 22 months, and that's if I could get the person to be perfect. They were getting done in 6 months. And I'm like, 6 months to get the same outcome it was taking me almost 2 years to get? Like, I got to figure out what you're doing. I closed my clinic to study it. Like, I don't want to see another patient. I don't know what I'm not doing, but I'm going to figure out how to do that. So my sabbatical of 4 days, library filled with papers saying, I got to figure this out. And in the end, that process of how do you rewind and reprogram, addiction to carbohydrates is very real. And what I think is important about the different folks like Marlon, like Kiani, is to show the next, he's got an 8-year-old that he wants to see married. One of the most important things he can show that 8-year-old is do not reward her life around food, which means you can't be rewarding your life around food. And that is how you grow her brain to not suffer from whatever dad's brain did or whatever uncle's brain did. And in that process, I look at what it is that I did to my kids, where I said, all right, I get that your grandmother thinks I'm completely crazy for making you go to bed at 7 o'clock, but I know what your brain is doing at the age of 6 years old. And after a long day like that, she wants to have supper at 6 o'clock for the whole family. Well, she can have supper for the whole family except you because it's your bedtime. And I was the worst daughter-in-law. I got chastised for saying, she's so strict, she's so mean. I'm like, no, I just know it's my job, that no one else is going to be the advocate for their brain like me. And I made sure that every one of their third grade classes had a little bitty class on concussions and how concussions affected the brain, and how alcohol did the same thing, and how marijuana did the same thing. And it wasn't like, cartoony, put a frying egg in a frying pan, don't do drugs. It was a brain that got swollen, that was swollen from a baseball bat to the head. And the next one was swollen by brains that drank alcohol. And the next one was swollen by brains that smoked marijuana. You're like, that was real science. And guess what those third graders did? They went home and told their parents. How do I know? Because they all called me. The point I'm making is addiction isn't the new part. It's that, and anybody who's been on a carbohydrate journey of removing carbs doesn't have to fight me that it's addictive. Day 10 will show you exactly how addictive it is. Because if you don't have a support system or somebody that is being your accountability partner, by day 10, you're like, forget it. I don't care. I want anything that tastes sweet.
Is it really that same mechanism that's making these drugs so addicting that carbs are utilizing? Is that why it is the same for a lot of people and us?
So I like to point out, when your brain is developing, especially in that adolescent brain, there are several wires they're neural pathways, but think of them as wires that go from your hippocampus out to the thinking part of your brain. And your personality will be part of this, but your environment will be part of what gives you pleasure. If in that adolescent part of your brain, your dad or your same-sex parent, really important, same-sex parents are very important for that pre-adolescent relationship development. But the other parent works. It's just, don't let the same-sex parent off the hook. Theirs is the most valuable at that stage. But whatever the same-sex parent does with them, where it's truly enjoyable to the adult. Okay. So if you don't like to put together puzzles and you're spending time putting a puzzle together with your son, but he can smell it. You're not enjoying this. But if you love to go fishing and he doesn't like fishing, I don't care. Take him fishing, because what he'll remember is your love of something.
Wow.
And eventually he'll love fishing because it will bring back the memory of spending time with you. But the key thing for parents there is to man up, put your chest hairs on, don't strip them away. We want you to be yourself, because that self and your true love for something is what is attractive to that growing brain. So you have these wires before this really rapid growth in their brain. And you could get pleasure from several things in your life at that point. You could get pleasure from reading a book, from watching a movie, from spending time with family, from playing cards, from playing board games, you can get pleasure from sex, drugs, rock and roll. Those are easy. You can get pleasure from food. And so you have all these options out there, but if the only one you practice is food, these other little neural pathways become like spider threads, just tiny little zing. And if you abuse the one section, I like in my Brains of Addiction course, or it used to be called Brains of Addiction, but it's completely changed to brains from trauma to repair. In that course, I tell a story about a boy, and boys' brains mature a little later than girls' brains. So he's about 16. Yep. Well, it's actually later. It's more rapid in a later years of life. And the girl brain will be more developed by about 22, whereas the boy brain takes about till 26. So it's just a different season. So they're very.
And then we get smarter, right? And then we get smarter. Is that what happens?
Okay. We'll let you think that. Just kidding. But if you look at a 16-year-old boy brain, it's really fragile, especially because it's surrounded by 16-year-old girl brains that are incredibly well developed, very manipulative, will outthink and outsmart. If I could push reset on educating my sons, they would all go to a boys only school, because of the difference between that educational development when it's rapidly growing and how destructive, and I can say, I think I did this to a few boys, how destructive they can be because you're so much more mature in the emotional realm of things. So there's a 16-year-old boy, this is a true story, a 16-year-old boy, and he gets the courage to ask out a girl. And the girl shoots him down in a very embarrassing and harsh way. And really just, she was cruel. She makes what she did is where women get the label of evil. Just, it was awful. And he went home and of course didn't have the courage to ask out a girl for quite some time. In fact, the quite some time led to, well, I can just masturbate. Well, I can get the pleasure that I like. And these girls don't talk back to me, and they're sexy and they're pretty and they do these really horny things. And I have access to it in the quietness of my world. And his porn addiction started probably about 6 or 7 months after the heartbreak.
Teenager. Wow.
Yeah. And so he comes to us in the psych ward. And he is now, it's been 10 years that he starts out a couple times a week. Then it was most days of the week. Then it was a couple times a day. And of course, he's never touched a woman. He's never talked to a woman. He has developed his brain to think that this behavior that happens on the pretty, shiny, well-lit screen was normal. And so the judge sentenced him to the psych ward. Thank God he didn't sentence him to jail, because it would have been who knows what. And the judge was way rogue. I don't know if I've ever seen an order like this since or before, where he says, he can get out of jail when he can treat a woman appropriately.
Wow.
And what he meant is he could have a conversation. Like, we had to go back to the judge and say, what the hell are you talking about? And he's like, well, clearly he doesn't, I'm not a doctor, but I know there's something wrong with the way he looks at women and the way he talks to them. He comes like a different person shows up. And he was right. That judge was totally right. So as we train this childlike brain, and that's unfortunately what happens with addiction. When people say, I don't know why it's so hard, but every time I get lonely, I want food. And if you imagine what psychology that person is returning to, it is the time when they were lonely at that very adolescent development. So here's this boy who had a heartbreak from an evil woman doing something really naughty that never
cascaded his entire life from that trauma.
Yes. No man showed up to say, you get that she was awful. You get that that's not what most women would do. No one grabbed his hand and said, let me pull you out of this darkness. I mean, it really makes me emotional, because I have 3 sons and I just pray to God that, we stay connected enough that if someone hurts them, that we pull them out of the ditch. Because I'm sure the people who loved him, if they had known what was happening deep inside his mind, they would have, found a counselor, found a preacher, found somebody, who could have said, I just need you to be kind to him and show him that women aren't all this way. And the only person that he could have heard that from and listened to was either a peer group or a peer leader. And no one showed up. So here's this 26-year-old brain, and he's got spider's threads for all these other places where he could draw pleasure. The only place he could get pleasure was to masturbate to pornography. And we needed to now suppress that part of his brain, and we needed to wake up the other parts of his brain that says, do you know that people get pleasure when they talk to people? Do you know that people get pleasure from, a game of cards? Do you know that people get pleasure when they do acts of service for other people? I mean, those types of things were what it took about 2 years.
Wow.
For him to get out of that psychology. Now, the beauty is the team that was surrounding him, they were so committed to this puzzle. I mean, he was almost like a fascinating, there's no prescription medication. There were prescription medications that were going to make it easier for him to sleep better. There were prescription medications that were going to make it really difficult for his leading dopamine surging part of his brain to fire, that's the pornography, to fire. They were going to cost $1,000 a month, and they did. It took about 6 months of that prescription medication where he took it, and it did make a huge difference on how much he could wake up those other little spider threads. And it's that type of arc that I teach in this upcoming brains course that I'm about to launch on my channel. And you say, what does that have to do with keto? You're like, it has everything. When
can I underscore something that you're making me think of? So there's a very real chance that when somebody's complaining, or not complaining, wrong word, when somebody is sharing the challenge of them backsliding, relapsing, binging on food, and it may be unknown to them, they may be dealing with a deep-seated trauma that has been a seed from their childhood. And that's why at 30 whatever, 40 whatever, they keep falling into the same food addictions. And
It's
they
real
know that.
every
Wow.
time.
I just
I mean, I'm not saying this because it's an opinion. You go to addiction medicine and you say, why did they relapse? And you either find that the relapse is centered around a time of extreme stress, extreme joy, extreme is on the outside of what we're looking at, but they walk into this realm that something went really well. And this is the place where they're supposed to use all the skills that we've been trying to work on. How do you celebrate? How do you enjoy the place in your brain that says, I want to engage in a way that continues this long-term dopamine feeling of success. And the only thing they know how to fill it in with is the addiction that they learned at a very young age, that the trauma that was associated with that. And, trauma has, you think of car accident, but I would contend that the neurodevelopment in this 16-year-old brain was as awful as a car accident. But the danger was nobody knew. There wasn't a newspaper report about a motor vehicle accident. There wasn't an APB put out that he ran away from home. It was a girl. It was very evil and embarrassing to a 16-year-old who was at a critical point of getting the courage to ask a woman to be in his, to be part of his journey of discovery. I mean, it isn't an accident that, I think I'm a house of boys, that every superhero, especially if it's a male superhero, has this origin story where a girl shoots them down or something like that. Because that rite of passage, it is a tender moment. And when it goes horrific, it can be years before they have the courage to say, I'm going to try that again. And that trauma, if they never address it, I like to point out, and this is another thing I talk about in my brains course. Have you met the man who finds this lovely woman in his mid-20s and he marries them and they journey for a few years, and then about in the mid-30s he starts dating someone in their early 20s, destroys the relationship that he set up in the first place, but this 20-year-old that he started dating is just everything to him and it's this perfect fit, and they journey again for about 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and then something happens and he's attracted again to the 20-year-old. Every person has met this man. He exists in everyone's community. If you unpeel what happened to that man, somewhere in his developmental years, he stopped maturing. And it's not that his mirror neurons couldn't mature him. It's that he's not in a place where he could learn that. A men's Bible study, a support group, a therapist, some place where there's actually constructive feedback saying, I don't know what you think that is, but that's not the way you do this. And you watch that man say, what is it about a man and a woman that are attracted? And it is their emotional maturity. And when one person emotionally matures and the other one can't go because they didn't learn this thing, the relationship will break. Now, whether it's divorce or they just live in the same house, but they're on 2 different planets, it is truly about the emotional development as a union that you both are, maybe you've got one that goes a little faster, but as a pair, you're continuing to mature. And that isn't subtle in the world of happiness scores in life and fulfillment of your earthly presence. But when you realize, and again, everybody can usually relate to the man who's got the 3rd wife and he's 25 years younger than him, but they're happy as a clam and they're so great. And why is that? And what you'd like to know, what you'd like to have happen is somewhere along the line, the woman is smart enough to say, you need to work on this problem. And she makes him go to a therapist, or she shows up with the preacher and says, what the hell's the matter with him? Like, help me. And that is where hopefully that man can say, all right, it happens to women too, but the man version is so much easier to point out because it's an example in our communities, that when that emotional development is blunted, it is often from a trauma. And if they're courageous enough to go back in and unpack the trauma, it's in the unpacking of the trauma that they then are free, that then their mirror neurons can pick up, well, why does that man do that for his wife? Well, I want what their relationship has. They look at a couple, the couple's 50, 60 years old and they're playful and happy and they they fight because that's part of being related, or in relationship, but they journey in a joyfulness. He's like,
Wow, you're giving a new meaning to the word therapeutic.
Yeah,
Really?
this is therapeutic ketosis. Couldn't everybody
Literally.
tell? But I point that out because when I first started out on this journey, first of all, I was never going to write a book. I was never going to write a book. I think my husband asked me 500 times, you should put that in a book. You should put that in a book. And then I wrote a book about my mom. It's a love story about my mom. Okay. And the second book I wrote was, how do you do that on a scale? Because I really like using keto chemistry, but it's about 1/10 of what I really love. And what I really love is, how do you repair a brain in its wholeness? And that is the part of when I went to launch the Consistently Keto course. I had been working on this workshop. And I think it's worth saying, and maybe this will bore people, but I really think it's worth saying that I love public speaking. I like being a teacher, if you would. I think there's something that's very enjoyable about that for me. And I was doing I was inside a jail running a workshop for broken brains, and I called it Brains of Addiction, inside a jail. And it was on a Native American Indian reservation. And it had the highest per capita addiction for alcohol in the country. And I was like, I wanted to go see, could that be fixed? Could you educate your way out of that? Well, when I first started, I couldn't get anybody to show up that wasn't drunk. So I'm like, well, where are they sober in this community? Turns out they're sober in jail. So I'm like, well, let me go in there. So the workshop was 3 hours long at first. I gave it probably 6 or 7 times before I realized the same questions kept coming up. So then it became a 5-hour course. And then I gave it another about 6 or 7 times before it became an 8-hour course. And then these people would get out of jail and they'd invite me to their jobs. So then I went to all the teachers in the community, and we had a teachers workshop. And then we went to all the police officers in the community, and they had a workshop. And then the course grew. And what had happened is, whenever I had to stand after the workshop, if I had to stand in line and answer questions for more than an hour, it meant that curriculum was going to go on the course the next time, because the same questions kept coming up. Like, oh, I need to build this into the curriculum, because obviously that it's not a dumb question. It was a very good question, and it left them without the answers. And so as I built this course, somewhere somebody from the Department of Defense either attended it or saw it, but invited me to teach soldiers. And now my cute little course had become an income stream of a 12-hour workshop. It took me 2 days. And I'm telling you, it was brilliant. Like, I made sure that every module had at least one patient story, but often 2 or 3. And that you had to work in a community. You had to so I divide them up into like 3 or 4 teams, and they had to scratch off the one answer of the list of statements that was false. So most of what they're fighting over and trying to scratch off, these scratch offs, like they're going to find a little asterisk behind the scratch off if you get the question right. And it was brilliant because they were fighting. I had done the same approach in a couple of on STDs. So I'm doing this lecture, and the warden of the jail comes and says, we have this real problem with herpes. Do you think you can give a lecture on STDs to the inmates? And I'm like, sure. So I'm trying to perfect this ability for them to work in teams. And so I have this, I use I just hack it, right? Because I'm like, all right, you're in a jail. What can they not have? They can't have chocolate and they can't have coffee. So I get to bring in chocolate and coffee as rewards. So everybody gets coffee, and then there's this beautiful pile of chocolate for whoever wins. And I'm telling, this was in the male unit, and they're like 300-pound, huge Native Americans. And we've got like 4 tables with 3 or 4 men at each table, and they have to scratch off. They have 5 questions that are all about STDs, and in the middle of it, there's herpes, but they got trained. So they get down to the last question, and they get points. And whoever gets the most points, because they get the question right, look at this pile of chocolate. And at the end, they're at the last question, and they have equal points. So whoever gets the best points wins. And they are screaming and hollering at each other about the difference between HPV, human papillomavirus, and herpes. I think it was HPV and herpes. And they're like, I know the answer. I'm like, as a
Wow.
teacher, you can never be more
Yep. Yep.
rewarded than when your students are so engaged. They're screaming at each other about the
You
answer.
cemented the lesson then. Wow.
So the reason I bring all that up is when you looked at what was happening in that jail, like, I think it's another one of the moments where you don't realize the ripple effect you're having as a leader, that they would get out of the jail, and they would tell their family what they learned in jail, which is something they'd never heard, that when you drink alcohol, you swell your brain. When you look at that anti-inflammatory effect, when you go out of ketosis,
Mhm.
and you can feel the swelling in your ring fingers, and you can push your thumbprint, your brain just got swollen too. Okay, that's the same problem. And it is that addiction to rewarding in the wrong behavior that when they say, gosh, I have the heaviness after I had a binge of chocolate yesterday. It's like, do you have anything else in your life that you felt like that? Oh, it feels like a hangover. Like it does.
Same
And
thing.
it is chemically, especially in the way of cellular swelling, it's a very similar pathology. And as you watch, what really unfolds in the journey of brain addiction is related to how well you can truly love yourself when no one's watching and no one's giving you praise and no one's giving you scolds or putting you down. That when you look at a healthy brain, it is so much more about the psychology. And when I wrote Keto Continuum, I on purpose picked a man with a broken brain, because it's the subtext for why this is a continuum. If you think the guy who, this poor kid who got addicted to pornography for 10 years during the most developmental years of his brain is going to live happily ever after and never crave for watching pornography again, you're clueless about how the human brain works. He's going to suffer from that for the rest of his life. But the journey forward, his ticket out of hell, is the relationships that are around him and how well he can say, I had a tough day. And then he has a human being with real love and real caring around him saying, I've had tough days too, buddy. Why don't you tell me about it? And that's the same thing that I push to have people have happen in a support group. And when you really look at what Marlon's doing for this community of keto, it is to say, yep, keto chemistry is an awesome way to get your body the healthiest it can be. But it's in that form of those continued nurturing, gently growing relationships that are rooted in a healthy way to reward ourselves and to recover from a messed day.
Well, so Dr. Boz, like you're really underscoring the importance of like ketosis is a tool, but we're really doing therapy to trauma. We're really doing deep-seated trauma therapy. I mean, and because that's probably the cause of where a lot of our eating habits that are putting us in the physiological state of we think, oh my God, I'm overweight or I'm a whatever. And it may be all this time coming from the fact that we have deep-seated long time ago trauma.
Right.
I think that, you know what's amazing about what you're doing, and you have the gift for it, is this isn't being talked about in the keto verse. So you bringing this up, and because of my background, I'm totally saying yes. I have seen kids that have aged out, and I've seen them when they're older. The stuff that they went through when they were 7 and 8 froze them emotionally at that age. And even though they're an adult now, they still go back. In fact, especially when there's something high stress, they will revert back to that. And the ones that really bad stuff happened at that age, it locks them emotionally and many times even cognitively at that age. So if you kind of juxtapose that to like, well, what if you have that trauma around food? No matter, I can tell you how to get in ketosis and how to fast and what to eat. One of the things people say, oh, what meal plan should I go on? What keto food? None of that matters. Well, right. What you're saying.
Right. It is interesting. The number of times I get people saying, why don't you write a food plan? Like, because when you're focused on the food, we've missed it. The food is a part of what we're talking about, but especially in this story of Keto Continuum, you'll hear me talk about how his prayer, he's a Catholic and he was doing the rosary, but he kind of did it mindlessly, right? And what happens in the journey of his Keto Continuum, and it is on audiobook too. I think the audiobook turned out better than I mean, it's the same thing, but it's really a story, and you can hear that story in his growth. Where I had some editors say, are you sure you want to touch on religion here? And I said, it's not religion, it's the growth of their spirit. Like, I'm not saying, so he uses a rosary and, I use acts of service, the journey is when you are stuck and you look around and say, I want what that guy has. I want what that woman has. And then you get into their personal space enough to say, well, what do they have? How do you sustain a life that doesn't revert back to we all have traumas. We all have, you can't blame your parents forever. You do need to become adult enough to say, well, how do I get that? And it really is the spiritual growth of shutting off the noise in your life, having the core relationships that say they matter way more than some of these other ones do. And I need to make that a priority in the daily decisions I make. And that sounds like a nice checklist. How do I do that for a lifetime? And without developing that spiritual component, that reward of there's a personal dialogue going on in your brain at all times, and you do control it.
Can I underscore that with a little bit of science too? And I know you know this, that in the prisons, the most successful intervention comes from, and you don't even have to be believing in metaphysics and all that stuff, but if you can get somebody to reframe religiously, prisons, if they basically accept Jesus, what they found is that intervention, and this is not
right.
This is just saying that if you cognitively reframe an inmate to do something that powerfully, that is the biggest predictor of success.
Have you ever seen the MRIs associated with that?
No.
Yeah, you can see it. You can see it on an MRI, the difference between that process when someone's a believer in it wasn't specifically Christianity, but it was a believer, and that need to have a higher power that was walking them through their life. And when they would pray, when they would meditate, it would truly change what was happening. The brain scans would show that's what beta waves look like. That's what that
they biologically affected their brain. That's
yes.
My God.
Yeah, when you grow the spirit of a person, and it never touches on these. When you said in your text, oh, these people know about ketosis, you can rip the rails off and talk about what you want to. I'm like, well, if I can talk about what I want to, I'm going to talk about how you really develop a person into, sustaining keto is one thing. It's a measurement of if your food has been your addiction, which I contend anybody who's overweight has found it at least for a season was addicted to it. You say, well, how do I have the successes for my meth patients? How did my successes for opiate patients? How was my successes they were all the ones who found relationships and that core development of service, or in a sense, service was relationships instead of substances. And so again, a prescription saying, go out and get yourself some relationships. It's so much more than that. So to talk about it says, but it's in this book. That's the part that you say, well, how do you do it? Well, read the book and then pay attention carefully to the choices he has to make. And, I didn't want to lose the audience by, but I think I kept it in there enough where, I like how it turned out anyway.
Okay, so and speaking of that and not losing the audience, I think this has been incredibly powerful. We can buy that book now.
Say it again. Yeah, that's on Amazon. I can give you a link here too.
Okay.
The other part
in the chat, yeah.
Okay, perfect. The other part that I wanted to make sure that your people know is that we are so excited about our recent awakening, if you would, here we go. I got the links here. Our recent release, our recent premiere is tomorrow for a documentary.
Oh, okay.
Super excited.
Wow, that trailer was really good. I'm gonna put it in the chat so people can watch.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. oops, I didn't mean to put all those in there. So if you, the ISBN numbers, you don't need to copy, but if you want the ebook or the audiobook or the paperback, there you go. It's in that little chat. One of the parts of this story is, I think I'll just tell you a little bit of the origin story, which I think helps you to frame so I'm happily married for 25 years now. And my mom died in late October. My brother lives in Tennessee with his family and comes back, and now both of my parents have died within 4 months. And there's a farm. Okay. There's a farm with a peacock. Like you got to be at the farm. Like there's a problem we all have to figure. This was not going to be our problem, but now it's our problem. Right. And as we're at the funeral and we're talking about what happens next, we mentioned the idea about, well, I know Jesse, which is my brother, you've always wanted to move back to the farm. If you're going to do it, this is it. Or you cannot leave a farmhouse empty in South Dakota. It will be, I mean, within a week, the kids were already partying there. And within 6 months, you would have critters. I mean, it's just, you cannot leave a building empty in South Dakota, in the middle of nowhere. So he decides, yes, he's going to quit his job and move back to South Dakota.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a profound change in their family. And I think it was on the day of the funeral is what I remember, but maybe it was like the day or two after, because the whole time is a blur for me. We're sitting around the table, and for any of you that have sister-in-laws out there, you know what I mean when I say it's a forced relationship. It's two women that were never going to choose to be friends that now are in the same universe. And it's just a forced relationship. So my brother has a wife, and he's had this wife for 20 years or whatever. They've been married, and she lived in Tennessee, and he was attracted to a strong female because my mother was a strong female. His older sister was a strong female. His little sister's a strong female. Okay. So we now have another strong female in the mix of this mess. And my husband at the perfect time says, honey, you've been looking for someone to do your documentary with. You should ask Michelle, my sister-in-law. I'm like, what? Like, what are you doing? Like, she's right here in front of me. And she's kind of shy, but she's shy around us. So, which is, of course, a consequence of just not a lot of time together, all strong females, right? And she goes, yes. Well, now I'm stuck. So she is the star of this documentary, which she had tried keto a couple times. She's about, I don't know, she's probably 80 pounds overweight. I mean, plenty of pounds overweight. So now you take a forced relationship, you take the grief of my mother, you take 100 pounds overweight woman with this bossy sister-in-law, you add cameras. And that's our documentary. So she moves to the farm without my brother because we needed to start filming. And her youngest son started that journey. And that was about 2 weeks before Christmas, which was literally like a week and a half after, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks after Mom's funeral. And so the documentary comes out tomorrow.
Wow.
Okay. It's the premiere is tomorrow. The second episode is on Tuesday, and it'll come out every Tuesday for the next 10 weeks. And then we'll have a live show in the first part of June, which will be Michelle and I together saying what is her 6-month update, because she'll be at 6 months by then. And we had ideas of what the show is going to be called, but you can see that you don't have to hang around me long for me to point out when addiction is an issue. So we talked about all these American traditions and how carbs were these American traditions.
And Hawaii, and addiction too.
Right? Yeah. So we named it American Tradiction, a journey of breaking carb addiction. And I just think my mother, first of all, would be so just, I cannot put words around how much our relationship has grown. I mean, I needed a patient to care for. That's what I do to heal. Yeah. I knew better than to open my clinic because I was just so hoping, just the broken heart's going to make me cry talking about how much that was a tough season. My sister-in-law needed help, and she was the first to admit it. She's a strong woman who had lost her mojo. Well, how do you find the mojo for a strong woman? You put them around another strong woman that cares about them. and it won. It's this beautiful story. I can't wait for you to see it.
Wow.
So I encourage you to look at it tomorrow. It'll be free on YouTube. It starts tomorrow, and it will be every week until the 11 episodes are out. And pray for it, actually. Pray that
I'm gonna pray about it for sure, but I'm gonna be promoting this because people think this is not keto. This is not about keto. It's not, like you said, it's not a meal plan. I don't need any of that stuff. What you're talking about is keto, because the food addiction is the reason why everybody, backslides, setbacks, relapses, whatever you want to call it. If you can address the trauma where the food addiction comes from, you have real success. So if that documentary is Michelle's journey, her trauma, and through her food addiction and carb addiction, like I have family in Hawaii that I talk about fasting or keto, and I always I can't give up rice. Yeah, Keone, all the time, right? I gotta eat this. I gotta the noodles, right? That's pigeon for you guys, but that's but you're gonna get so much better life. And I'm not saying you can never have the rice and the carbs and the things. It's just that like a bratty child, you're gonna put it in its proper place. Maybe once every 21 days, but it ain't gonna be every darn day, every single meal, never giving your body a chance. Sorry, I kind of went off, but that's how
No, it's exactly right. It's exactly the subtext where, I mean, I have people that, they come to my support group. I have a support group that I do for free every week on Fridays to say, this is my gift to my community. And much like you, I get as much out of it as I give, because I need to be accountable. I need to be, have somebody looking deep in within my choices. And it is impressive to me, the ones that flash in and out versus the ones that come, they leave for a while, then they come back for a little longer. And then they come back and say, the longer I'm here, the more things get better. Yeah. And that's truly what I think happens in a ketogenic world. Like they go keto and they do great. And then like, ta-da, and then they go back to something, right? And then then it'll be a while, and then they'll try again. And honestly, they're probably cleaner keto, or at least they don't, when they slip up, they don't fall quite as hard. Yeah. At least that's the general consensus. And then they realize, all right, there's just this process that says, if I'm going to give up carbs, I have to put something else in this space.
Yes.
And that's when they really start to rise and say, oh, it's a journey, it's a continuum, and you're going to waver. Yep. What you want to do is be around the people who waver, but get right back on. You got to have somebody showing you, I was wrong, you're right.
Yep, exactly. And I'm sure the first thing they teach in CSAC is relapse is recovery.
Amen. Yeah.
So if somebody's going to go keto and you think you're never going to have a bonbon or a Twinkie,
right,
and you're setting yourself up for a failure, because I'm like plan for the Twinkie. Let's plan spaghetti, and let's know where it's going to be on this journey, and not feel like, I had a plate of spaghetti, it's all over. Be like, oh no, I scheduled this cheat. I mean, I'd rather have somebody have a scheduled cheat than like
I tell my people, if you want to schedule a cheat, just make sure there's BHB around for tomorrow. It's the fastest way to get the chemistry back. And once the chemistry is back, you'll start thinking normal again. Yeah. And then it's much easier. Yes. That's a hack I've learned over the last
trick. Yep. That's a trick. Guys, BHB ketone supplements, and Dr. Buzz has incredible ones, will help you bounce back from the cheat. But like I say this, you're not going to fear the cheat or the rice or the carbs if it's in your plan. I'm like, the only plan you need is what's going to happen when it goes wrong. That's the only plan you need, really.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't get to answer a lot of questions, but I hope it was helpful.
Well, I tell you what, all that stuff we got, like, the stuff about like my gallbladder, this, and I'm constipated on carnivore and everything. I'm sure we can do, quick Q&A, stuff like the dawn, stuff that we all know, the dawn effect, all that kind of stuff, people. But all that is nitty gritty stuff that's very valuable. But I feel like the stuff that you shared, and especially this documentary, and hopefully everybody here in the group saw the principle of, if our struggle is with food and with relapsing as we're on this journey, then maybe we just need to be getting into therapeutic ketosis. And that
Exactly.
maybe that means a little bit more deeper than we thought it used to mean. But I mean, hey, knowing your ketone levels and your blood glucose and all that stuff.
It's accountability. It's a really good accountability. The good thing is about when you're doing that, you really do have
yes, you do.
Feedback from your body saying, no, I check mine, I post mine. I'm not exempt from saying, oh, I can feel when I'm in ketosis. That's a bunch of wonky. You should measure it because when you feel it, the numbers are, I mean, they're not everything, but they are really important for saying you're in this zone of helpful and then you're in the zone of not so helpful. And you can calculate it into a place that we can measure when I'm taking care of serious medical conditions. I think the undertone of saying, why did all the psychology come up? Because when I have someone who's in crisis, I mean, they have pancreatic cancer, death rates in 6 months are very high. You're going to die. And now I need to get into their brain. I need to take out of my brain and put a pensively infused knowledge about how do you mentally mature them? How do you meditate? How do you come to a place of peacefulness? How do you not stress out? Oh, by the way, you're dying of pancreatic cancer. You know, all these things that are the true improvement of a healthy person that do not have a diagnostic code. Medicare and your insurance are never going to cover from a physician how important this whole package is. But I contend the prescription medications aren't going to heal the person, and the diagnostic code is not going to cover the visit. It's not about what happens in a 20-minute visit. It's about an emotional relationship that's in a journey, which is why I do it free, because there's no billing. It doesn't matter, but it's truly the best work I do is every Friday morning.
Oh, well, Dr. Like that is the gift. And you mentioned earlier that you like speaking to people, and whether it's in the prison or it's with people struggling with addiction, you have the gift, because there's a lot of doctors who they are smart, but they suck at what you're amazing at. And they are not nearly as effective as what you're doing, because what I think and what I hope people have gotten out of this and what people get from the video is that if they can get to this level, all the other stuff, and we'll talk about that for sure, that stuff is going to be fun. But I just want to thank you for your time on a Saturday.
Yes.
It begins today, so I'm sorry for taking everybody's Passover away, but I hope that you guys have been blessed by this, and it's really helped me see that, you know, we got to really get to the core issue of it, which is basically how do we get people into therapeutic ketosis. So if anybody say anything for Dr. Boz before we close this out, now's the time. Unmute everybody. Unmute Keone. Everybody this. Oh, Patrick's already ready to go. He's already unmuted.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Boz. This was enlightening. One of my therapeutic ways that and I guess I'm strange because I've never fallen back. What I did in the beginning was I immersed myself in Dr. Bosworth, Barry, Jason Fung, all those people, and I constantly watched their videos, read their books, and to the point where I was too scared to go back. And I guess that's part of retraining my mirror neurons by being around that constantly for a year and studying. So maybe someday I will have a plate of spaghetti, but right now spaghetti scares me.
Right. Well, I think the level of engagement is a reflection of how much a mirror neuron is being activated. It's not an accident. It's not like coincidentally you do great and you happen to immerse. No. You immersed, and that learning was how you were able to transform it into your life and say, oh, look at that, he does great.
And it's still ongoing. I'm still doing that, not as much as I used to.
Me too.
But there's always something to learn. And my main goal now that I've got my diabetes and some of the other metabolic issues I had pretty much under control, my focus is to heal my brain because it's been damaged. Drugs in my past, lots of carbohydrates, inflammation, and I'm trying to remember things. I want to be that 95-year-old guy that can still play chess.
Amen.
Right? I want to die a young man in an old age. And even if I die next week, I got that covered too. So I don't worry about that.
No, I think that the beautiful part about that is that as they do heal, and I've watched people, we used to have this this motto. This might say something about my clinic that I shouldn't reveal, but there's a motto on the back wall of the clinic, because we were chronic disease management. We did not post the word addiction anywhere. We're a small community. If you're going to the addiction clinic and it says addiction on the headlines, that was too revealing for most patients. But what happened was they were so hungry for love, for that relationships, that sometimes they just wanted to be addicted to the medical team. And they wanted us to solve every single problem. And as I watch, Patrick gets to be on the inside of some of the support team that runs the page of Dr. Boz, and he gets to see firsthand when people get nurtured, they get loved for the first time in, unfortunately, a while. We're like, no, they can't become addicted to us. We will die. We will all be fatigued and burned out when they get addicted to us.
They'll bring you under.
Right. So getting them into their own support groups is why we say that's where the focus needs to be. You can't be in my support group. You don't live near me. You have to be in relationship with these people. And Zoom and COVID changed everything. So I don't even know where to file that in my brain anymore. But it is what, when I see people really journeying, the healing that Patrick has had has turned into so much of his acts of service for the people in the support group that it's a sustainable addiction.
It's my addiction now.
Yeah.
You replaced it with a better addiction.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You win.
The addictions.
All right.
It's a better buzz.
All right, Keone and Angie, thank you guys so much. Keone, any last words for us? I see.
No, just
Your
thank you
brother
so much.
is on board. Is Keola still here?
I'm not sure.
What's up, Keola? Yeah, he jumped in. So that was awesome. Your story set it off. What you've done is leadership stuff, man. That's gonna help so many people. So thank you.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, Dr. Boz, for all the great insight.
Awesome. I'm glad you liked it. I hope it's helpful to people.
Awesome.
Definitely.
All right. Okay, good. All right. So guys, I feel like we got to have like a follow-up to therapy for this one. But like actually, well, I would write treatment plans, right, Dr. Boz, and then treatment.
Right. If you open up a wound, you got to make sure to cover it.
Yeah, you got to set up the next meeting, and you got to make sure you don't just come in and, okay, well, my work here is done. No, you got to it's follow up is everything. Follow up, right? But you guys, Dr. Boz's the trailers in the chat, her book that she talked about is there. And I guess we're blessed to be able.
Secrets are all in the book, I guarantee. That's where the secret is, in the book.
Okay,
It's a great,
there you go.
It'll help you.
And there's this documentary which sounds really awesome. Watch the trailer. It's gonna make you watch this thing. And guys, just I tell you what, keto is just an excuse to give therapy now. Isn't that great?
Amen. You fit.
I'm gonna have to. Okay, the solidarity with South Dakota has to end because we are in Hawaii. It's pretty hot. So, sorry, I can't do it. I can't do this anymore. It's crazy. But thank you so much. We appreciate you so much. Thank you, and we can't wait till you come back now that people can fly in Hawaii.
Yeah, you're in the the democracy. No, what am I thinking? The Republic.
It is a Democrat state, by the way. But yeah.
Yeah, I know very much. I learned that when I was there. Like, I go back to South Dakota so I can breathe.
Actually, it's a constitutional republic.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
All right, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you, everybody. Aloha. Have an awesome Saturday. Bye, you guys.
Bye.
All right.
Rewind.